9:52 is the time. Need to know with Jeff Angelo is the program. An Arizona judge has rejected Democratic Governor-elect Katie Hobbs' request to sanction defeated Republican gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake in Arizona over her failed effort to use the courts to overturn the state's election results. Right decision? Let's talk it over with the Chief of Staff at Young Americans for Liberty. That's Themea. Sean, welcome to Iowa Radio. Good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Sean, what do you think? Obviously, there's a lot of discussion day after day about election integrity in the country. Do you think it's the right decision to not sanction Kari Lake for saying, hey, I don't think this election was on the up and up?
I don't think she should be sanctioned. I think sunlight is the best disinfectant, and people need to be able to petition the government for redresses and challenge things that might seem funky, because politics is the adjudication of power, and people will do bad things to keep that power. But the more important discussion that I think Republicans need to be having if they want to win over young voters is to learn from the lessons of Kari Lake, because it doesn't matter, in a sense, if Maricopa County was fiddling with the election. She should have won this election outright, but she lost too many young voters and moderate voters by going all in on that 2020 was rigged and messaging about the past. Young people care about what's impacting them right now. They see the 2020 election narrative as, a boomer narrative, if you will, to use some slang. And if Republicans want to take back the House, will continue to grow in the House and win more elections in the future and actually limit the size and scope of government and maybe fix some of these problems with voter fraud, then they need to be messaging to young people better, which means getting past and getting over the 2020 rigged election narrative. She should have won outright.
Well, and that's the thing, Sean. I mean, I feel like what you're identifying here is the difference over what is popular sometimes to talk about in partisan media and what wins elections. Those can be two different things, where I could come on the air and talk about, oh, you know what, every time the Democrats win, it's because they cheated. And there'll be a certain segment of my audience that'll be like, yeah, you tell them, Jeff. But in the end, if you're talking about that as a candidate, it doesn't win you elections, right? I mean, we just have to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I'm optimistic for the next cycle, because by then 2020 is going to be in such far of the past. But who knows? There could be another sore loser narrative or a it's not fair narrative that pops up. And you know what? If you want to fix some of the problems that you're identifying, you've got to win, right?
Yeah.
No offense, but losers don't legislate. And so if we want to reach more young people, Gen Z came out overwhelmingly Democratic this past election. And the exit polls and my conversations with college students are showing they're just sick and tired of the 2020 discussion. They want to focus on the issues. And we've got to learn from that if we're going to win and try and get this country back on track.
So, and again, let me identify. Sean is Chief of Staff of Young Americans for Liberty, and he's all about winning elections. So that's why he's talking like this. So, Sean, what are the issues, man? How do we get people like Gen Z and Gen X and younger voters in general to start talking about voting for a more conservative vision of governance?
Yeah. Well, it comes down to the old axiom of politics. If you don't take an interest in politics, it will take an interest in you. And our candidates and our leaders have got to be making sure they're actually reaching people where they're at. And what's hitting college students right now, it's inflation.
Yeah.
They cannot afford to pay for college. They're going into massive debt. They can't afford to buy a house. Let's call out the Democrats for continuing their terrible policies and printing more money that's making our dollar worth less and indebting them for future generations. Let's keep talking about some of these COVID mandates and mandatory vaccine policies that are still in place, wildly unpopular across different demographics of young people, because, hey, they don't want to have to take something and lose their bodily autonomy if they don't have to, and the science is clearly on our side there. And they also want integrity. I think Glenn Youngkin won a race that he shouldn't have, because ultimately he projected not just strength, but that he was trustworthy. And again, if we're continuing to repeat these narratives about how, oh, it's just not fair, appear that we're whining, and appear maybe even a little bit sleazy, then we're going to lose young people who don't trust government and want to vote for people that they could say, hey, I look up to this person, right?
Yeah.
So that image matters. So those three things I'd say: inflation, calling out the COVID regime that is still in place and still hurting young people, and making sure we're leading with integrity.
Well, and Sean, one of the things that I talked about in this last election, where Republicans did very well in Iowa, as you know, is that my Democrat friends will say, hey, let's stop talking about these cultural issues. But I don't feel like the cultural issues turn young voters off, do they?
Well, it just depends which cultural issue you're looking at. I think that young people, they are sick of how crazy the education system is right now, in the sense of the content that's out there. Bringing to light the craziness of CRT and how useless some of the stuff that's being taught in college and in public schools across the country. I mean, that's an issue that unites more people than not. They don't necessarily want to speak up about it if nobody's leading on it, right?
Yeah.
So the education issue is a winning issue, but everything's a mixed bag, and it depends what state you're in. I mean, people in, I grew up in New England. People in New England are going to care less about some of the more social conservative issues than people in Texas, and you just got to make sure you're messaging appropriately. That's what it comes down to.
All politics is local. Sean Themea, Young Americans for Liberty. Sean, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for checking in.